Well, I'm here with Grant Gershon. Grant, it's just wonderful to see you.
Frank, it's great to see you too.
Yes. So we'll talk about how you are in a minute. I just want to introduce you. Many of our singers have known you and worked with you, but for those who may be joining us for the first time, Grant is the artistic director of the Los Angeles Master Chorale and resident conductor with the Los Angeles Opera, as well as guest conductor and clinician. Did I leave anything out? Or those are your main jobs?
Those are the main gigs for sure.
Yes, right. Well, we'll get to those in a few minutes, but again, for those who may be joining us for the first time, would you talk a little bit about, give us just a capsule summary of your background in music? How did you come to be a professional musician in general? What was your path like? And then how did you work into conducting in specific?
Sure. I'll give the shortest version that I can, which is that my mom was a piano teacher. And so we had a lot of music growing up in the family. And so I started taking piano lessons when I was quite young. When I was a freshman in high school, I was very shy and very introverted, but I did sign up for choir to be the accompanist for the choir, and so I was the pianist for our concert choir for 2 months, and then in November of my freshman year, I was doing gymnastics, and I managed to fall off the high bar, broke my arm spectacularly, and couldn't play the piano for about a year. But of course, I was enrolled in choir already. And so the only thing to be done was to draft me into the tenor section. And that was the thing that kind of changed my life, because it was the first time, having grown up as a pianist, it's a very isolated and isolating art form. And so suddenly I was making music with friends and the whole social aspect of it. That summer, my parents shipped me off to a music camp here in Southern California, where we rehearsed for 2 weeks the Mozart Requiem. And at the end of the 2 weeks, with orchestra and a chorus of 120 high school kids, we sang it. And that was kind of my road to Damascus moment, where I knew, it was just so overwhelming, both to be a part of that piece at that age, and doing it with friends, with choir geeks from all over California, and kind of finding my tribe. So at that point, I knew that I needed to have a life in music, and I wasn't at all sure what it was going to be. So in college, I was a piano major and a voice major for a little bit. But then I realized that singing is actually really hard. So I stuck with piano, but I did sing in the choirs all through college. After college, I then went into the opera route and became a vocal coach and pianist, started working at LA Opera in the late 80s. And through that, I met some people who became huge influences on my life and career development. John Adams, the composer, Peter Sellers, the director, and Esa-Pekka Salonen, who was just coming into the LA Philharmonic as music director. And so really all three of them took me under their wings, each in their own way. And Esa-Pekka Salonen became like a mentor to me, encouraged me to go into conducting. And I had, at that point, a lot of interest in it and zero experience. And suddenly I found myself in this position of being the assistant conductor of the LA Phil. What happened was, I said this was going to be short, and I apologize.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating.
So the LA Phil didn't have an assistant conductor. This was in the early 90s. And Esa-Pekka's wife, Jane, was like 9.5 months pregnant with their second child. And they were getting ready, the LA Phil was getting ready to go on tour. And so they had all these different tour programs that they were rehearsing. And Esa-Pekka told the folks at the LA Phil, well, if my buzzer rings and Jane is in labor, I'm out of there. It doesn't matter if it's a rehearsal or performance. So I suggest that you hire somebody to cover me during this couple of weeks period. And so they called me and said, can you cover these concerts? And I said, well, Sure,
Yeah.
I guess. And I just prayed that Jane would hold out, and nothing would happen. But a week and a half into the 2-week period, I did get the call from
Oh my.
Ernest Fleischman, the legendary executive director of the LA Phil at the time. It was 6 p.m. before an 8 p.m. concert. And he just said, well, are you ready, Grant? And I said, yes, of course, sir. And so my wife, Alyssa, who is amazing in every way, helped me to get my tuxedo together and get dressed and grab the scores. And so I found myself at 8 p.m. up on the podium in front of the LA Philharmonic, basically my first time ever in front of an orchestra in performance.
Oh my goodness.
And I think it was Beethoven's Seventh and a new Stephen Stuckey piece and Saint-Saëns violin concerto and all this stuff. And I have to say the orchestra was amazing. I grew up in LA, so a lot of them were friends of mine, people I had known for a long time. And any professional orchestra can band together and they can make a performance happen no matter what is going on the podium. Yes, right. And so I think that night was a lot like that. I mean, they pulled together. Nobody was harmed. The music and the composers survived. So that kind of launched me on the conducting path. A few years later, this position at the LA Master Chorale opened up, and again, choral music was really my first love. And I was encouraged to kind of throw my hat in the ring for this position. Paul Solomonovich, the legendary choral conductor, was the music director at the time, and he was retiring. Anyway, long story short, they offered me the job, which is insane, because again, I was very green at the time, and although I knew the choral repertoire really well from just having geeked out over it in all my formative years and sung a lot of major works. Again, in those first couple of years with the Master Chorale, everything that I was doing was for the first time, whether it was a Mozart Requiem or a Verdi Requiem or whatever. So here we are 20 years later. I'm going into my 20th anniversary season. I just love the organization so much. In the meantime, I went back to LA Opera, as you mentioned, as resident conductor. And so I'm kind of balancing those two loves of choral music and of opera right now.
Oh, what a great journey you've been on. I loved hearing what you said about finding yourself through choral music, because so many of us have, through the love of singing and the love of this repertoire, but also the camaraderie and the social aspect. I remember years ago just sitting at a BCI breakfast one morning with the other faculty, and we were just all so happy to be among fellow geeks, and our tribe, as you said. I have to say, given the way my mind works and hearing about your background in gymnastics, I was trying to come up with some connection between, uneven parallel fifths instead of uneven parallel bars or something like that, but it didn't quite work out.
Well, and I have to say my gymnastics career was quite short-lived. It was basically 15 minutes. Oh. The 15 minutes that it took me to kind of get onto a stool and lurch towards the high bar.
Oh dear, oh my goodness. I know of so many pianists who have worked their way into either as coach or accompanists and then conductors who began by accompanying vocal, either ensembles or vocal lessons. They played for voice teachers in their studios. And it's such a great way to not only learn the repertoire, but to learn the language, as it were, of vocal music. You get to sense when the singer is going to breathe and how much time they need.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it so invaluable to have that experience at the piano. And it was one of the things that I really, really loved growing up was accompanying singers and instrumentalists, but particularly singers and song recitals. And of course, then, using that to get into the poetry. into the sound and the sensuality of language.
Mm.
Things that of course, as choral artists, those are things that are so much a priority for us as well. And so there's a lot that translated from that.
So in your work, can you talk a little bit about the difference in how you may work with the LA Master Chorale and the LA Opera? For example, when you're conducting an opera, the cast is expected to know their music, when they show up. But with the Master Chorale, are they reading the music with you? What is the learning process? What are the timing, that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are some clear differences. One of the things that I have to say that I love about opera is the amount of time that you have on a project. Generally, you've got maybe a 3 or even 4 week rehearsal period, intensive rehearsal period, where you're in, for at least 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. And you really, it provides this great opportunity to get under the skin of a piece and to really get to know your artists and for them to get to know you. With the Master Chorale, it's much more speed dating. Where we have a quick rehearsal period generally because the musicianship level in the group is very, very high. So we generally will have anywhere from 3 to 6 piano rehearsals, depending on the difficulty and complexity of the music and the familiarity of the program as well, before we hit the stage. And so it's not as much time, but on the other hand, the time is spent together is very, very intense, building up to the performance. I do find, and I'm sure, Frank, you found this as well, that it's fascinating as a conductor in performance to think about the difference between doing opera and doing choral or concert work, because in opera, there are so many more variables. There's so many more things that can go wrong. Sets can come crashing down. You've got enormous distance oftentimes between the furthest singer back, at the back of the stage and the musicians in the pit. And, so you're constantly kind of negotiating that aspect of things. People can't hear the same as well as they can in concert. There's so many more things that can go awry, which is very exciting.
Yes.
The concert setting, assuming that your rehearsals have gone the way that you planned them, and assuming that you have that everybody is on the same page and of the same mind. There's aspects, there's nuances that you can create. There's things that can happen in the moment because you're all so connected together that are really just so extraordinary and so unique. And especially, I find that singers in a choir give so much of themselves, and it's partly, I think, because of the poetry, the text that we're responding to. It's partly that we're there with our colleagues in close proximity. I think that it's part of it is just the ethos, the community aspect of singing in a choir. I thrive on all of that and just the vibe.
How wonderful. I'm reminded, Diane Paulus is a stage director. I remember hearing a panel discussion in which she participated. She's done a lot of theater and also a lot of opera. She was talking about some of the differences, and in theater, you have weeks of rehearsal, and then you have a preview period before the official opening when the show is up before an audience. But in opera, she said the first time you're, with an audience is opening night, and she said it's like being shot out of a cannon. And she said it is absolutely thrilling. And in fact, all of those things can go wrong. So you're on edge in a certain way, but boy, there's nothing like it. that keep everything together.
It's really true. And it's interesting at the LA Master Chorale, over the last few years, I think we've been looking for ways to kind of blend the experiences of staged and kind of fully realized performances visually and in terms of the physicality of it. So, for instance, one of the projects that I've been most excited about over the last 4 years is it's a piece by Orlando De Lasso called Grime di San Pietro, which means the Tears of St. Peter. It's a piece that that was written in 1593. It's late Renaissance, Italian Renaissance tradition. And we asked Peter Sellers, the stage director, to stage this for us. It's basically a full-length piece. It's in 21 movements, 21 different Italian madrigals, and we do it with 21 singers, and it's all in 7-part polyphony. So the numerology of that's kind of baked into the piece is very intense. But so Peter staged this for us, and we've been touring it all over the world up until the pandemic, and it's so liberating for the singers to be able to invest in a piece like this. We've performed it now like 25 different times. I think we had 28 rehearsals leading up to the first performance.
Oh my! Which for you is huge.
Yeah, it's just unheard of. And I have to say, if we had it to do over again, we'd have 38 rehearsals before, because it's so challenging and so intense. But it's all by way of saying that in choral music, and I'm seeing this all over the country and globally as well, this idea of breaking down the strictures of just being in rows of singers singing straight out to the audience. The music that we're performing is so obviously it's so emotional. It's so deep, profound at times, and fluid and flexible as well. So finding a physical language that reflects that and can help to unlock the music, I think, is really fascinating. And again, with this piece, we had such a strong artistic affinity to the music through the investment of all of that rehearsal and kind of living with it for that long.
How wonderful. And I would imagine just getting it up and staged offers a certain amount of freedom as well. The singers aren't, locked into their score in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's of course all memorized, and I'm memorized as well, and moving with the singers simply so that I can, be as helpful as I can to them. So, if the singers are all on the floor, I'm on the floor with them, kind of giving guidance, or, if we're wandering around the stage, whatever. I have to share with you, if you will, when the pandemic started. So in March of 2020, we were actually doing this piece in New Zealand. We had a performance at the Auckland Festival on March 13th, 2020. And it was so, of course, it was crazy to be, we flew into New Zealand, I think around March 10th. And then, as we all know, March 12th, I think, was when the NBA canceled their season, and Tom Hanks and his wife announced that they had COVID in Australia, and everything fell apart, right? And we're on the other side of the world waiting for our performance to be canceled, but it wasn't canceled. And of course, now we know we should have just stayed in New Zealand, because they knew what they were doing with the pandemic. So, so the morning of the performance, they had arranged for a ceremony, a welcoming ceremony for the artists in the festival, from our festival hosts. And it's a Maori ceremony called a pauiri. And it's the most beautiful ritual to create a sense of community. But in retrospect, we realized it was just absolutely, the most dangerous, terrifying thing. So what it was is all of us as artists were in a line. First, there had been a lot of singing together and all this great community building and speeches and stuff. Then, so we were in a line, the artists and the hosts facing each other. And in the ceremony, then you approach each person and you go down the line. You put your forehead to forehead. You put your nose to nose. You look into each other's eyes and you breathe the same air. And that's the point of the welcoming ceremony. And it's, I mean, it is the most beautiful thing imaginable. And of course, you know, that was, in a way, it was like the final gesture of the, you know, the before times.
Yes, yes. But in retrospect, oh my goodness.
Yeah. I mean, we were, you know, afterwards, we, you know, when we realized that, you know, the outbreak in California was already happening strongly. I mean, we were just terrified that we could have, you know, given COVID to one of our hosts. And luckily, it seems like New Zealand escaped unscathed from our visit.
Yeah.
There in March.
Who knew that we were in such a dangerous profession as singing, you know?
I mean, that's a whole other thing, right?
Yes.
It's like this thing that we love so much, that we have dedicated our lives to, that we believe in so strongly, to build community, to break down barriers,
yes,
to build bridges, to unite, you know, different histories together, different experiences, you know, all the things that we believe in so strongly, celebrating the harmony of our differences, that all of that suddenly is you know, the thing that can cause, you know, incredible harm.
yes.
And I think for all of us, that's been one of the most difficult things, especially early on in the pandemic, to wrap our heads around. And it's why we're all so grateful that we're emerging.
Yes. So you mentioned to me earlier that LA Opera is about to do a live performance. Stravinsky, do you want to talk a little bit about that? And
yes,
what it's like to make music in person after all this time?
This has been absolutely incredible. It's our first baby step in Los Angeles towards being back in person. And so we recorded Oedipus Rex, Stravinsky's Oedipus Rex, a couple of weeks ago. And what we did was we had the orchestra first record their part alone on stage at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, as far distanced one player from the next as possible. And of course, everybody masked, and the wind players behind plexiglass, and all, you know, all of the health and safety regulations clearly accounted for. And so the orchestra recorded that way. The following week, I went in on stage with 16 choristers. Oedipus Rex is for only tenors and basses.
Right.
And so we had 8 of each. And there again, they were as far apart from each other as humanly possible. I think we had a 12-foot diameter around each singer. And so we recorded that way. And of course, that's quite a challenge, but you know, everybody was so eager to come back and to have, I mean, this is the first time we'd seen each other, even behind masks and whatnot, in 12 months at that point. So, and of course, at that point, pretty much everybody was vaccinated, and everybody certainly was COVID tested, so that the singers could sing without their masks and record that way. Now, in the next couple of weeks, we're bringing the soloists in, recording that. So we'll be making the film and recording in post-production over the last few weeks. But just in the last couple of weeks, we were able to announce that we'll give a live performance for, I think, 800 audience members in the 3,200 seat Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. Again, observing all of the health and safety standards to keep everybody safe and comfortable, but we'll actually be on stage singing together Oedipus Rex with James Conlon conducting, and it just feels like a miracle. And you know, the Hollywood Bowl now here is opening up with Gustavo Dudamel and Ellie Phil next month at the Master Chorale. We're now finally quite confident in scheduling our concerts starting in the early fall and scheduling our season again. So thank goodness it really is the light on the horizon.
Yes, absolutely. And, none of us has a crystal ball, but of course we hope that we'll be able to continue in this way. And one doesn't, maybe people don't quite realize, but the thought of having to sing or play with such distance between you is really a major issue because we're so used to listening to each other, let alone for you to have to deal with balance and physical distance and all of this stuff.
Right.
Really
Yeah, it is interesting. I think that, if we were coming into that situation in the before times, it would be even more challenging. I think that, because of what we've all been through and because of this incredible yearning that we had to make music, I feel like our antenna are up very, very high. And we're ready to roll with any situation that can help us get back.
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful way to put it, because everybody just seems to have the same goal. We all want to make music together. We all want to have ensembles, theater, dance, whatever the performing arts may be. We just want to and do it together.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've been involved in many, many world premieres over the years. Can you talk a little bit about your own thoughts and personal tastes and how you balance this idea of world premiere with doing a Haydn piece, doing Josquin, and the full spectrum of music? I don't know how well I've thought this through, but it seemed to me that Los Angeles had, through the orchestra and the Master Chorale and various other arts organizations, has been far ahead of other cities, including New York, in promoting new works of art. And you've developed an audience for this.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I mean, I have to say, I do think that there's some truth to that in terms of Los Angeles, and I burst with pride about that because I'm from LA originally, and I grew up I was in high school in the 70s, I was in college in the 80s, and I grew up with all of the Los Angeles as cultural backwater, and I saw all the early Woody Allen films with the LA bashing and everything, and it was true largely. I mean, we were not as sophisticated as a lot of the other big cities in the States, let alone globally. I really do credit Esa-Pekka Salonen, who I mentioned earlier, as a mentor to changing the musical landscape in LA, and he changed the audience, the audience expectations, the audience curiosity, and he really laid the groundwork, I think, for all of us now over these last few years. I mean, it's interesting. For me personally, I'm very musically omnivorous. I just, I kind of love it all. Of course, this next season, we're going to be doing the B minor mass. We're going to be doing the Rachmaninoff all night vigil, Handel Dixit Dominus, and of course, Massarian. And that's, what can you say? It's so great to be able to commune with these pieces, right? At the same time, I love working with living composers and helping kind of in the midwife process, as it were, helping to make their vision reality, and helping to, for the singers and the players to find the language along with the composer, and then to be, in a sense, the person that then introduces this music to an audience and makes the case for the music. I've been super lucky work with the composers that I have over the years, and to see, to see them kind of pushing themselves creatively, and stretching, yeah, I guess one of the pieces that really comes to mind was at LA Opera. We did the premiere of Il Postino by Daniel Catan a few years back, and I was lucky enough to conduct the premiere of that piece. And that was, I think about that experience a lot, first off, because I love Daniel Catan so much. And he was a composer that was one of the most collaborative composers that I've worked with. And so there was so much that happened in the rehearsal room with him there, shaping the music in real time, where we would, experiment with different tempos, with different phrasing, with different emotional temperatures of the piece. And we really, I felt like we were all kind of creating the piece together in the rehearsal room, more so than almost any other experience that I've had. But there's always some aspect of that when you're dealing with a living composer of, and I suppose what's interesting then is to interpolate that experience back to when you're doing a piece of Bach or Handel or Brahms, and knowing that these were actual people that were experiencing their music in real time at some point.
Yes,
and,
right.
And so finding, just finding the ways to make sure that their music is speaking as clearly as possible. And what that means, frankly, is that sometimes it isn't exactly, that not everything is on the page.
Right.
I guess is what I'm trying to say is, and you have to kind of be the advocate for the composer and for your musicians as well, and to find the language that makes the music speak in the most communicative way.
Because what's on the page may have been appropriate for that moment in time with those forces, those people that the composer had, and the concert hall or the church or wherever it was. Doesn't mean that it's universal.
Yeah, absolutely. It's having that perspective is very, very
valuable. Yes. And as often as I think, well, when I meet Brahms, I'm going to ask him why he did this, But how great to be able to work with the composer and with composers who appreciate the back and forth and what you, as well as the performers, the musicians have to say and have to offer.
Yeah, absolutely.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned the extraordinary musicianship level of the Los Angeles Master Chorale. One of the things that I loved so much when you conducted for us at BCI was, you're before a group that has never been together before. You have very, very experienced people and some not so experienced people singing together. You demonstrated in such a beautiful, musical, and loving way that you sort of drew out this incredible music performance out of, as I said, a group that's never been together before. Can you talk a little bit about how you might approach guest conducting or working with groups that you've never worked with before? Is your standard different? Is your standard the same, but you use different language? Something a little bit about how you might approach that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I love working with musicians at every range of experience, and I love working with students. I love working with non-professional musicians and of course pros as well. So the end goal is the same, no matter who you're working with, but the means to get there has to be tailored to who you're with, and of course as a conductor, oftentimes you just have to make these kind of snap analyses of the situation. But different groups will respond to different, some groups will respond, really well to demonstrating and modeling approaches. For others, it might just, it might just be to talk more about the emotional background and historical background of a piece. For some, it might be very, you might have a group that just likes to get into the weeds technically and just really look at, just the nuts and bolts of any given passage. Some might might work best approaching something very instrumentally. So, maybe, getting rid of the text for a minute and just doing on syllables or on different, different kinds of those kind of exercises. And so you kind of, try to analyze pretty quickly what the best combination is for any given group. But again, the goal is the same. And the goal is to make the performance that communicates the music the most clearly, that's the most emotionally invested, and at the, at technically the highest level possible. And I guess, in the end, what it is for me with any group I'm working with is for the musicians to feel ownership of the music, right? So that it's not, so that you're not doing something because the conductor said this is how you do it, or or because that's what the tempo marking says, or the dynamic or whatever, but you're doing it because that is what communicates the piece the most clearly to the audience. And that's what kind of takes, the information that you're getting from the composer on the page and making it vivid and making it emotionally true. And so those are the things. And again, that creates ownership in the piece, that creates that situation where everybody is taking pride in the performance. And you know how it is when each section in a choir, for instance, is taking pride in what they're doing, and like the altos are awesome about and they're all working together, and the same with the tenors and sopranos and basses, and so within the group, you've created the framework for that to happen. I mean, that's the ultimate goal.
Right, and that is so much a part of the conductor's experience and the conductor's job. It's not just being a traffic cop, it's really a creative process. And I loved what you said about finding the different ways so that everybody on that stage takes ownership of what they're doing and has pride in putting everything together.
Yeah, I think back to Esa-Pekka Salonen again, who was like a mentor to me. And one of the things that he would often talk about was that the idea that the conductor is creating a framework in time for all of the musicians to give the best performance that they can give. So it's not about micromanaging and boxing people in, but it's creating a framework that people can trust, because that of course is so important. That people are able to play and sing with confidence and take chances and risks with confidence as well. And you're creating that framework that's completely clear and has that kind of elusive flexibility within the structure. And again, it's kind of allowing everybody to be themselves and to be human beings who are making music together.
How wonderful. Well, I think that's a great place to end. Grant, thank you so much. This has been fascinating, and I just love talking with you on a variety of different subjects.
Oh, Frank, thank you so much. I feel absolutely the same, and I miss singing and making music with your choirs so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful experiences.
Thank you so much. So if you'll stick around, we'll have a question and answer with everybody who's listening.
Great. Sounds great. Thanks.